Welcome, everyone. We are here with Mark Anthony, aka the Psychic Explorer, also known as the Psychic Lawyer. And we're super excited to have him here today. I met him briefly, and Mark may not even remember this, at the Afterlife conference, I think it was called, in Arizona, maybe 8 or so years ago. And I was just so impressed with your presentation at the time. We only talked for a couple of minutes, but then had an opportunity to meet again at New Living Expo. And so here we are.
Thank you, Renee. I'm very honored that you're having me as part of this discussion.
Great. Well, we're excited too. For those of you who are new to Mark's work, I'm going to give you just a little bit of background about him. Mark Anthony is the JD Psychic Explorer, also known as the Psychic Lawyer, which is really the name that you went by when I met you in Arizona many years ago. He's a fourth-generation psychic medium who communicates with spirit, but he's also an Oxford-educated attorney licensed to practice law in Florida, Washington, D.C., and before that, the United States Supreme Court, which is pretty impressive. Mark was named a notable graduate by the Arthur Findlay College of Psychic Science, which is an awesome place, by the way. He's a Spiritual Awakenings International Circle of Honor honoree, and he received the OMI Award for the Best Psychic Medium. He appears in national media, including CBS, TV's The Doctor's Gaia TV, and the Discovery Channel. He also co-hosts the live stream show, The Psychic and the Doc, on Transformation Network. The Psychic Explorer, which is such a great name, travels to mystical locations, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today because he talks about it in his book. He goes to remote corners of the world to examine ancient mysteries and supernatural phenomena. He's been a featured speaker at conferences, expos, and universities, including Brown, Columbia, Harvard, and Yale. He's also the author of 3 best-selling books. His first 2 were Never Letting Go and Evidence of Eternity. And his latest book, The Afterlife Frequency, which I couldn't put down, has won multiple awards, was ranked as one of the top books about faith, and was even up for a Pulitzer Prize. He's also a VIP executive contributor for Best Holistic Life magazine. So, wow, Mark, quite a bio. Welcome again, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Renee. Yeah, I'm a pretty busy guy, but thing is, I love what I do. And a lot of people ask me, are you still practicing law? There's no way I could do the practice of law and my spiritual work. And it came to a point in my life where I had to make a decision to leave. And we can talk about that if you'd like. But my focus now is on my work as a medium, as a lecturer, as a writer, near-death experience researcher, survival of consciousness, afterlife researcher. And I am just so honored and grateful that I'm able to do this.
Well, you're also an educator. You know, you're really an educator about this stuff, and that comes through everywhere I've seen you, whether you're up there solo on stage or, you know, the panel that we were on together. I mean, you're really an example of what it means to really teach about spirituality and the idea that this isn't really real, right? We are spirit having a human experience.
I like to say that think of your body like a car. Okay, and your car takes you here, there, everywhere, but then when your car no longer works, you get out of your car and you move on. And so we're not the car. We're what's in the car. In other words, we are spirits having a temporary physical visitation in what I refer to as the material world. And it's very important for people to understand that. And that basically that's what every belief system from ancient Hinduism through Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Native American spirituality, the religions of the Pacific all teach us that the soul, the who and what we are, pre-exists the body, comes into the body, and then moves on after the body dies. And I think that finally the the divide between faith and science is deteriorating, because now, with the benefit of quantum physics, we know that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. And in the past couple of years, there's been some definitive evidence which seems to prove through the scientific method that our soul, our spirit, survives physical death. I know it does as a medium, but I like the fact that now there's science on board with this.
Yeah, finally, when you think back, and I know you're a history buff, when you think back, there was a time, right, when science and spirituality came from the same place, right? And there wasn't this stigma
Yeah.
around the spiritual world. And so it's really great to see that happening again. And with the onslaught of all the quantum science for the last 100 or so years, thanks to people like Einstein and Schrodinger and the double slit experiment and David Bohm, who's one of my favorites, and finally, people are getting on board with what's actually happening in the quantum world.
Yes.
So before we go there, because that's actually one of my favorite topics too, let's rewind the clock a little bit. So childhood, psychic parents, right? Not every psychic medium has psychic parents.
Yes.
Early on, when you were developing your skill, or I should say it probably emerged for you, what clairs did you develop first? In other words, did you see, did you hear, or did you simply know that spirits were around you?
All of the above. I'm clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, clairsavant, sentient. I see them, hear them, feel them. They allow me to taste things. I know things that they transmit to me. And when I was about 3.5 years old, I was interacting with my invisible friends, and which is not unusual for a toddler. But then when mommy and daddy can see who I'm interacting with, that's a whole new dynamic. And the thing about my parents is, my dad had been a Navy SEAL, and after the Navy, he became an aerospace engineer. So this is a real no nonsense guy. And then my mother was a commercial illustrator and an artist, and they were from two very different backgrounds, but it's a cool story. My dad was at a USO dance right after he got out of the Navy, and so here he is. He's like 23, young Navy SEAL, all full of himself. And the funny thing is, you never think of your parents as being beautiful or attractive people, because we knew them as mom and dad. And I'd seen a lot of pictures of them, after they passed, and we were going through pictures. And I saw my dad, and I'm like, has there ever been an unattractive Navy SEAL? You know what I mean? It's like and then I saw pictures of my mom, and I'm like, whoa, mom was like amazing, hot. And dad said, so here I am at this dance, and I see this foxy looking dame. He's talking about my mom. He thought she was like 30. She was actually 19 years old, but because she worked at a high-end retailer, she could get all the designer clothes for wholesale. So mom was always dressed to the nines, and they were both ballroom dancers. And she was a nice Italian Catholic girl. He came from a very waspy Baptist family. And the thing is, after they went on 3 different dances. And she said, before we go she said, I like you a lot. She said, but you need to know this. I see spirits. And my dad replied as only a sailor could, with a number of colorful metaphors and expletives, followed by, I do too. And then they're like, oh. And so what we've seen from a scientific standpoint, Renee, is that it appears mediumship, the ability to communicate with spirits, is a genetic proclivity. And so it is what's known as a recessive genetic trait, meaning that it can skip a generation or so. For example, a dominant genetic trait would be being right-handed. Being left-handed is a recessive genetic trait, because it can skip a generation or so. So when you get two parents that have the same recessive genetic trait, then the likelihood of one of their children having that trait increases exponentially, and that would be me. I have an older brother and an older sister, and they have precognitive ability, but I got the whole mediumistic package, if you will.
You got the whole enchilada.
So it would seem. So it would seem.
That's a great story. I also think too, and we're definitely going to talk about frequency and frequencies. I sort of liken it to, right? There's radio signals, and it's almost as if your parents unknowingly, although their souls knew, right, brought them together. It's almost like their frequencies found each other across the dance floor.
It does appear that way. And I find myself when I'm in a group of people, it's like you can sort of pick up on the other mediums. It's that frequency thing. And when we met at New Living Expo, it's amazing because I gravitated to all these people that were mediums. And I think that happens in a lot of circumstances. People that have similar interests or abilities tend to be drawn to each other, because there's so much more than just what our 5 physical senses of sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch can perceive. There is the 6th sense in our ability to tune into frequency and detect those vibrations, which can really open up a lot of the world beyond the visual.
Yeah, for sure. I remember early days when Anthony opened up and we had met another medium, and she walked over to us and she said, "It's nice to meet all of you." Because she could just see everything in the field, and we cracked up. So let's go back to the time when you were an attorney, because I'd love to hear what was the biggest aha moment for you in your, what you actually uncovered in your psychic work while you were practicing as an attorney.
The thing is, I've always had these abilities. It's part of who I am and my skill set. But what happened when I got out of law school and I started practicing law? My first job, I was a prosecutor. And so when you're a prosecutor, and for people who don't know, I'm the attorney who works for this state. And when the people get arrested, it's our job to evaluate the case and decide whether or not we should take them to trial or prosecute them. And when you're fresh out of law school and you're at the prosecutor's office, I used to get assigned to first appearances. And first appearances, when somebody gets arrested, they have to be brought before a judge within 24 hours. That's pretty much every state in the country. So I'd be there with my co-counsel, because they'd usually put 2 of us in there. And then generally there's always a public defender there for people who didn't have an attorney, and occasionally private attorneys would come in. So they'd bring in all the folks that had been arrested the night before, and they're going to go in front of the judge, and we determine, should we object to bail or whatever. And I'd say, well, that one's obviously a drug addict, drug dealer. That one's drunk driver. That one's spouse battery. That one's a sex offender. That one's a thief. Before I ever looked at the reports, and my co-counsel would be like, "How do you know that?" Because when you bring people in from the holding cell, they all have a really grungy look, because they've been in jail overnight, they're not sleeping, and they're scared and upset. So it kind of got to be a game. Before we show Mark the arrest report, let's see if he can figure out what they were charged with. They're like, "You seem to get it like 90+% of the time." Well, so I started getting this reputation in the legal profession as this guy who knew things that he probably shouldn't know. And then I was hired by a private firm to work on the other side, criminal defense. And that was kind of hard for me, because I liked being on what I perceived as the right side, which is prosecution. And if there was somebody that I saw that wasn't guilty, or it felt like the police had abused that person, I'd get rid of those cases. Okay, I wanted to go after the bad guys, not people that had no business being under arrest. But anyway, now I'm a defense attorney, and there was this trial that my client he was a big bruiser, and it was a barroom brawl. So Big Bruiser A got in a fight with Big Bruiser B, and my client beat up the other guy, so he filed charges, because that's usually what happens in the barroom brawl. The loser is the one that wants the guy that beat him up to be arrested. So as the trial starts, jury selection. And that's where they bring in a group of people, and each side gets to ask the prospective jurors questions to weed out any prejudice or bias. It's called voir dire, which is a French term called to speak the truth. You know, having practiced in Florida, we called it voir dire. Okay, but it's voir dire. And so the prosecutor, who was a really annoying person, was going and asking questions. And while I was there, I kept focusing on this one woman because I felt this female spirit around her, and I'm like, okay, this does not need to be happening now, okay, and I felt this clamping around my throat, like it was hard to breathe. So now it's my time to get up to the podium to ask the prospective jurors questions, and I go up to the podium and I start with a standard question. Has anyone here, because this was a crime of violence, you know, my guy got into a fist fight with another guy. So I said, has anyone here, or has anyone here have a family member who has been the victim of a violent crime? Well, lo and behold, the woman I was focusing on raises her hand, tears stream down her cheeks. And I'll never forget, she was such a sweet looking person. She began to shake and tremble. And she said, a year ago, my sister was in a foreign country when an escaped mental patient strangled her, dismembered her body, and threw her in a garbage can like she was trash.
Wow.
And I'm standing here in court, you know, and all I'm thinking is they did not tell me in law school how to deal with this. You could have heard a pin drop, and now I'm getting a visual on her sister's spirit. Now I know why I was feeling the clamping around my throat, because she'd been strangled. And my client's like, dude, what are you doing? And the judge is like, you know, everyone's looking at me. And if the listeners want to find out what happened, they're going to have to get my first book, Never Letting Go.
Wow, what a story. That's an amazing story. But what I'm surprised by is that the judge actually allowed that questioning, because it seems like it was a little bit off.
No, that's very typical, because the thing is, this is before the jury is sworn in, because what if there's somebody there like this woman
I see.
who could never be fair on a case like that?
I see. That makes
Okay.
sense.
And
Yeah.
and so yeah, so jury selection is a very important. A lot of trial attorneys, and I tend to agree, at least to an extent, that the trial is won or lost on jury selection.
Mhm.
And it's a very good process. It's one of the best things about our system. Find out, you know, what prejudice is, what, you know, I remember I had this one client, and he was a scary looking dude. Okay. You read about him in the Afterlife Frequency, Thor. Okay.
Oh,
Thor.
yeah.
All right. Now, this is another Thor story. This is not that Thor story. And Thor was in my office, and he had a beard and the long hair, and he's like, "Rrr." I know he was a, you know, motorcycle club guy. And I told him, I said, Thor, you need to shave the beard and get a haircut and clean up. And he looked at me and he goes, well, if the jury can't accept who I am, then blank them. And I said, well, Thor, that's the problem. If they accept you for what you look like, you're going to get convicted, because quite frankly, you scare me. Okay. And I'm your lawyer. And if you scare me, you're going to scare a bunch of people that aren't used to being around people like you. And he started cussing at me and all that, but he agreed. So he got all cleaned up, you know. And so here we are in jury selection again. And I said, as you look at my client, what do you think? What do you feel about him? And this one woman raised, and it was funny because I always saw Thor with the just scraggly, he looked like, you know, something out of Vikings, you know, like, oh, and he's going to come and, like, you know, plunder the village and kill everybody in it. And he actually cleaned up really well. And I'll never forget the client, or excuse me, the prospective juror, this woman said, he looks like that movie star Charles Bronson. and I could see Thor like, oh wow, like he's all like, and the funny thing is he went from Charles Manson to Charles Bronson, just because he cleaned himself up. And I actually won the trial. I won the trial because people will judge you on your appearance. I know in the spiritual field, we tell everyone, don't be judgmental. Jesus said, don't judge. Everybody says, don't judge. But the truth is, people judge. And all of my clients, if we went to trial, I would have them come into my office with a couple different outfits. And my assistant, she was a paralegal. She was really good at this. We would select what they were going to wear. All right. I said, if you got tattoos and stuff, and I have nothing against tattoos, but some jurors might cover them up. I had a woman when she had the Rolling Stones lips on her breast. I'm like, no, 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 no. Okay. But I like the Rolling Stones. I go, right. Except the church ladies on the jury may not. And so it may seem rather superficial, but that is the way the world works. And it would be nice if we could get beyond that and just see people for who they are. I mean, there's a lot of people saying, oh, that person's covered in tattoos. Well, yes, but underneath those tattoos is a person. I remember I knew this woman, she was chastising someone saying that you look like a streetwalker with those tattoos. And the woman she was saying this to was a nurse and a really good person. So that is something we all have to work towards, but also something we all have to be cognizant of.
Yeah, perception is reality. I mean, I was a publicist for 25 years,
There
and
you go. Yeah.
I'll never forget it because this one thing that one of my clients, who is a 3-time client of mine, said to me, he said, there's only 3 women in my life who get to tell me what to do and what to wear. And he said, it's my attorney, my wife, and you, Renee, my publicist. Because, I would position him and get him on CNN and ABC News, and, what he wore mattered. You know that
Yeah.
because you're in the media too. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I absolutely get that. And also, as a travel writer, having been to 90 countries, there have been times where I've traveled with men, mostly men, not so much women, but men who have either had a long beard or whatever. And I'm like, when we go into certain countries, you want to shave that, or you want to put your hair up, or put a hat on, or something like that. And you're right. That ego will rear its ugly head and say, if they can't accept me for who I am. And I'm like, okay, fine. Be in detention. I don't care. Be in detention, but you really should clean up before we go through a border custom.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
you're right. It's unfortunate that it's that way, but
Well, we're living in the material world, and in I know we're talking about consciousness and perception, but that's the perception in the material world.
well, speaking of perception, let's dive into history and religion, because I know you're a history buff. And you weave in some great, that's another thing that I loved about your book, is that you read in, you bring in these beautiful stories of places that you have visited that are spiritual in nature, like Egypt and Peru, Machu Picchu, which was a great one. And I'm curious, let's tie that to conditioning, right? Because through all these cultures and religions that we've all been conditioned by, we came to view religions, and of course, as a result of that, our belief systems, right? Which have dictated some of the things that we just spoke about, whether it's, what you wear, or if you have a cross on, or if you wear a yarmulke, or any of these things that kind of label you, there's a belief system that gets attached to it.
Right.
So, I'm curious about this. Well, there's 2 questions here, really. One is about the belief systems connected to things like religion. And then also that segue and the bridge to cultural places and past lives. So I personally believe, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, when we're drawn to go to places like Egypt or Peru in your case, or, different places, and we have a religious background, whether it's this life or in a past life, do you think that there's a connection to past lives that are coming into this life, kind of almost egging you on to go there to open up something spiritually for you. I know that was a long-winded twofold question, but
I in my lecture that I give on reincarnation, it starts with, are you drawn to certain cultures, time periods, places? Do you have passions and talents that just seem natural? Do you have phobias with no explainable cause? And if so, these are possible indicators of recollection of a prior lifetime. And so I do believe that. I mean, for me, I am so connected um, to Egypt. I am so drawn to it. I write about it. In fact, I'm working on a presentation on the secrets, mysteries, and curse of Tutankhamun's tomb that I'll be giving at the Ancient Mysteries Conference at the 𝐬𝐮𝐽 Association for Research and Enlightenment. And I have just identified with that archaeological expedition and other segments in Egypt, but I'm also drawn to other time periods. And what's really strange is my whole life I've been obsessed, it would be an interesting word, with the Byzantine Empire. Now, most Americans have never even heard of it. It's like when the Roman Empire, the western half collapsed, the Eastern Empire, which historians call Byzantine because the current day city of Istanbul was the capital, and it used to be called Byzantium, so they called it the Byzantine Empire. Why? Okay, what is it about that? I see their icons, the religious symbols, the history, and I identify with that. So I've done a number of past life regressions, which are interesting, but I had on my show, The Psychic and the Doc, there was this guy, he was a police captain from Indianapolis. This is a real tough guy, big bruiser, no nonsense guy. And what happened was he was working on a case and he met a psychologist who did PLR, past life regression therapy. And he was making fun of it, saying it's just a bunch of goofy people trying to pin their hangups on a prior life. And she said, well, why don't you try it? Okay, well, you challenge a guy like that, he's not backing down. So he does it. Hits on 3 lifetimes, one of which where he was a woman. Now, this is not the type of guy that questions his sexuality or gender. And he's a guy's guy. But the quote unquote most recent lifetime, he saw himself on these cobblestone streets, horse and buggies, gaslit lanterns in the street, and he said he felt it was the 1890s. Then he saw himself painting a portrait. And the first thought in his head was, I hate painting portraits, but I need the money. And he was painting the portrait of a hunchbacked woman. Okay. Now, there's a lot more to this. I'm giving you the shortened version. So he comes out of this, and he being a homicide, captain and head of the homicide division, he started trying to research artists who did portraits. Oh, and in that he realized he had a connection to France, spent a lot of time in France, but he didn't die in France. He died in a big city, a real big city. Well, this was in 1992. And the internet didn't become, for public use until 93. So he kept going to libraries, looking through art books, trying to find artists who did portraits of hunchback women, nothing. Well, his wife wanted to go on vacation to New Orleans, and he'd never been there. So he said, okay. So they're in New Orleans, and he's walking on Royal Street, and he walks into an art gallery, and he said his heart almost stopped. There on an easel was the portrait of the hunchback woman.
Wow.
And he said to the gallery owner, what is the artist's name? He said, J. Carroll Beckwith. They said, all I know is that he died in New York City, a big city. Now the detective had something to go on. So when he started, he went to New York and he got to, I think it's the Academy of Design, and they keep records from artists. And what he found is J. Carroll Beckwith was as meticulous as he was and had a 17,000 page diary that was on microfiche. Anyway, he went through all of it and he verified all these details. He throughout his PLR, he had like 200 details, verified every single one of them. Beckwith spent a lot of time in France, died in New York City, painted portraits because he needed the money, the hunchback woman. So he found all of this stuff. And the question is, why would you think in a prior life you were an obscure artist that nobody's ever heard of? And how many portraits of hunchback women can there be? Why didn't he think I was like Michelangelo or Matisse or, Monet? No, he was an obscure artist. Plus, with the amount of verifiable facts that came through the PLR that he was able to objectively verify through the records that he found in New York. So that's just one of several case studies I could go through. But that's why I think reincarnation is such a fascinating field of study, because at the afterlife frequency, I explain my theory on reincarnation along with all forms of spirit communication, because this isn't hocus pocus or magic. I believe there are sound scientific principles that can be used to explain these phenomena.
It's interesting because you're talking about, in spiritual circles, they call it the etheric template or the Akashic records, right? That the Akashic records, in essence, lives within our auric field, but there's also like an imprint in it and almost like the data cloud, right?
Yeah.
To use that analogy. And it's interesting because in our season 7, Dr. Ervin Laszlo, who's a philosopher and a theorist, systems theorist, right? He's a scientist, right? He thinks with science. So he talks about the Akash in that way. He said it's not the Akashic records, but he said it's the Akash. It's a field where the data of all that exists. So it makes me think of really the word that you use in the book, right? The frequency, that when he's going through this past life regression experience, that he's tapping into that information from that time period to pull through for the here and now for whatever reason.
Right.
We don't know the reason, but there must be a reason for it. So I find that fascinating, right? Because one of the things that, we do a lot with science and spirituality in this series, and we do that because we want the work that we do in spirituality to be grounded in science. I think that's really important. But I'm curious, we have evidence, we have case studies like the one that you're bringing up. We have all these amazing examples in all of your books, really. So why are scientists still so dead bent, I guess is the best way to describe it, on keeping these worlds apart? They hate when we use the word frequency, right? Because it's a scientific term, and even the material, it's not even the materialist scientists. I mean, those you could sort of expect would have an issue with frequency, but it's almost all scientists have an issue with it. So
not all.
So why do you think that is? Or why do you think it's such a challenging thing for scientists?
Because science is a form of religion, and they are so mired in that religion, they're being entrenched in it. Yeah, because when you talk to religious extremists, it's funny when they go, I believe, I was on this one radio show, and this guy called in, mediums are not a god, and blah, 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 blah. So I started quoting some of the scripture, Romans 12, verses 6 through 8, and 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 4 through 12, which talk about the gifts from God, which include discernment of spirits, which is spirit communication, and these are gifts from God. And he says, well, I don't believe that. That's against the Bible. And I said, well, which version of the Bible do you use? The one true version, the King James Version. So I knew I had him right there. And I said, and what does your particular belief system feel about the LGBTQ community? They're an abomination. And of course, he went through the whole rigmarole. And I said, well, what do you know about King James? He goes, what? I go, King James. Well, he wrote the one true, or had the one true Bible put together. I said, King James was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, who was a Catholic ruler of Scotland, but executed by her good Protestant cousin Elizabeth I of England. And then when Elizabeth died, there were no other members of the Tudor dynasty, so he became the king of Scotland and England, the United Kingdom, and he was an extremely flamboyant homosexual who lived openly with another gay man, and was and his nickname behind his back was the Nancy King. And so when he took power in England, his advisor said, really, you need to be a Protestant. And he's like, okay. So he became a Protestant. And his advisors also said, we need a Bible in the language of the people, like the Germans did with Martin Luther, instead of everything being in Latin. So he said, okay. So he ordered it into existence. I said, so to the caller, the Bible that you and your colleagues used to persecute gays was ordered into existence by a gay man. He said, that's heresy. I said, no, my friend, that's history. And he hung up, and the host of the show said, Mark, that was awesome. You're welcome back on anytime.
That is awesome, right? Because we need to break down those barriers right
You got to
now.
break that out. Yeah, getting back to the scientists, what we're seeing now is a lot of the quantum physicists, like Dr. Michio Kaku, Max Tegmark, Dr. Dean Radin. They are heavy-duty scientists who are now Dr. Gary Schwartz, that are seeing that eternal life does not violate the laws of physics. And so I developed the electromagnetic soul theory because we know from faith that every great belief system believes that the soul, the who and what we are, pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies. We know from the laws of thermodynamics and physics that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. We know from neuroscience that while the brain may only be 2% of the body's weight, it consumes over 20% of its electromagnetic energy. And so combining a lifetime of study of both theology and hard sciences, I developed the electromagnetic soul theory to explain what we really are, which is pure consciousness, a soul or spirit that is a coherent quantum electromagnetic field that exists eternally. And this provides the basis for all forms of spirit communication, mediumship, near-death experiences, deathbed visions, shared death experiences, OBEs, out-of-body experiences, as well as reincarnation. And my theory has been accepted by a number of scientists. They're even using it now, referring it to the EMS. And I'm very humbled and honored that they are. So I think that the divide between faith and science is beginning to erode, because it used to be in one corner we have the Newtonian reductionist materialists, and in the other corner we have religious people. Well, it's not quite so black and white anymore, and anyone who studies spirituality realizes that. It does get somewhat exasperating when we have to put up with the fanatical scientist atheists who call what we do pseudoscience. People would use that term applied to Nikola Tesla, and then for some of his theories, which are now a reality today. So I think that we're on the verge of exciting discoveries and developments. Our technology is increasing to where we're beginning to find evidence that consciousness, in other words, our soul, survives physical death.
It's great that you bring that up, because one of the other hats that I wear is I curate and produce one of the most prestigious TEDx events in the country at Berkeley, right? Berkeley is a very esteemed university, as you know. And there have been three, well, actually, Rupert Sheldrake, who you probably know, the famous biologist out of the UK, he was not on our stage, but he did another TEDx talk. His talk was banned, pseudoscience. Tim Freak, who did speak on our stage, famous philosopher out of the UK, right? He's also in this series, by the way. He's in season 1, actually, Turning Ideas Upside Down, banned. Dr. Shamini Jain, you know who that is probably, right?
Yeah.
Banned. Banned. I mean, she had peer-reviewed materials, everything to kind of back it up. I mean, she's Ivy School educated. So, even though things are changing, that was fairly recent. That was only a few years ago. And so we're still facing these issues.
Yeah, and for an organization that's supposed to be bent on open-mindedness and a free interchange of ideas, the free marketplace of ideas. So if something is quote unquote could be pseudoscience, why don't we listen to it anyway, let the speaker present it, and then let the audience decide?
Right. Yeah, because, I think it's really what you said, that the scientist or people on the other side, they've got too many years and history and paper and research, right? That's kind of all glued to a belief system, and cognitive dissonance is at play, right? To do anything to keep the same worldview. So anyway, I'm glad you brought up the electromagnetic soul piece, because that was actually my next question to talk to you about, because I love the name. So I'm glad you wove it in. It made me think of the work that, 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 does work with tuning forks. She's in our season 3, actually. And she kind of describes the tuning forks as, when she's working with somebody, and I guess anyone who's using tuning forks, it's like unsticking energy. She said it gets like murky, and she'll use the forks to unstick the energy to clear things up. And she talks about how we're all energy and everything's electric. I think that's even the title of her book, The Electric Body, or something like that. So
I can explain that, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you explain the electric piece?
Yes.
Because that, to me, right, and the magnetic piece, right? Because it's just fascinating to me. I mean, we're all magnetic in a way.
We know that everything is made of molecules, which in turn are composed of atoms, which are made of electrons, protons, and neutrons. Okay, by the time we get to 6th grade, maybe nowadays it's high school, but by the time we get to 6th grade, you should know that. But since the advent of quantum physics, and earlier when you said about the scientists, the thing is, Sir Isaac Newton, in a sense, invented physics as we know it, and also was the superstar of the Enlightenment and became the gold standard for what a scientist was. However, Newton believed that everything in the material world is what is observable, and that nothing existed beyond the atomic level. In other words, everything was made of molecules, which in turn are made of atoms. But he didn't have the technology which enabled quantum physicists of the early 20th century and all the way up to now to discover the existence of electrons, protons, and neutrons, which make up atoms, and in turn, those particles are made of a smaller particle known as a quantum, which is pure electromagnetic energy. Now, for our science friends, technically, an electron is a quantum because an electron is 1/1800th the size of a proton, all right? So it's just a negatively charged one. So what that means, Renee, as you well know, is that everything on the subatomic level is composed of the same electromagnetic energy. That means you, me, these microphones we're talking into, the radio waves that this show is being broadcast on, the light that we see from the sun, the rings of Saturn and beyond are all at the subatomic level composed of the same form of electromagnetic energy. And people tell me, well, Mark, that's really hard to believe and to wrap my head around, to which I reply, you think? I mean, this did require Albert Einstein, Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, David Bohm, Louis de Broglie. I mean, the greatest minds in history to develop this. So yeah, it's hard to understand, but why are you alive? And the chair we're sitting on is not, if both are made of the same electromagnetic energy at the subatomic level. Well, due to the, or rather explainable by the law of vibration in physics, everything from the subatomic level on up has its own unique frequency. So the chairs that we're sitting in are vibrating at a much lower frequency than we are. So it's all about energy and frequency. Albert Einstein said, energy is light. No, matter is energy. Energy is light. We are all light beings. And people say, well, that's really cool and all. But see, when Einstein said that, it wasn't necessarily provable, but now it is, because within recent years, scientists have discovered that our individual cells produce flashes of light. They're ultra-weak photonic emissions, which have been renamed biophotons. They are not visible by the human eye. This is not bioluminescence like you see with certain types of fish and squids and fireflies. These are flashes of light. And it's the same light that you see in the sun and from the stars. So MIT issued a study, I think in 2012, which indicates that our cells use biophotons as a form of communication, both in the inter and intracellular level. Gets even better. It's not just human beings and animals, but also plants. We've now found that plants have biophotons, and the roots of trees will have this fungus, the mycelia fungus, begin to form at the tips of the roots. And the mycelia fungus also has biophotons, and it appears that the mycelia fungus is something of a mediator between different species of plants, and will even direct the roots of trees towards nutrients and water. So what we're seeing is there's a whole subatomic world going on that's based on light. So Einstein, as usual, hit the bullseye.
He's one of my heroes too, actually.
Yeah.
I often think, God, wouldn't it have been amazing to have a 4-hour dinner with a man?
Yeah, it's Einstein. I saw this quote. He said, "Everybody likes me, but nobody understands me."
Yeah, right?
He really was. He really was an amazing person. We've had a lot of incredible geniuses throughout. I mean, Leonardo da Vinci, Nikola Tesla. I mean, there's just been so many incredible geniuses, Archimedes, but Einstein, I truly believe, was kind of in a class by himself.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, during the interview with Dr. 𝐬𝐿_𝐾𝐿, we both concurred that David Bohm and Einstein would be screaming for joy right now with what's happening, right? If they were alive to see the direction we're going. I mean, we still have a long way to go, but one of the things two things that what you just said remind me of, certainly the redwood trees are always communicating with each other. The roots, right, are communicating with each other to assist each other in the longevity. And then also the biologist I spoke about earlier, Rupert Sheldrake, talks about morphic resonance, right? Which is the idea that somehow at a subatomical level that we are communicating to our species and to others as a way to communicate knowledge that we need to survive, right?
Yes.
Beyond space and time as we know it, right? The entanglement, really.
Yes.
It's entanglement at its best, right? At its smallest level, microscopic quanta level, but also, they're now starting to see it with bigger things like the physical body, right? That's the whole, biofield healing that's happening right now. So, okay, I want to change course just a little bit now. You specifically talk about when you're connecting to the spirit world that they work through our hearts, not our minds. And the guides that we work with say exactly the same thing. We can't work through your mind or your brain. I think, in quantum consciousness, Peter Smith, he talks about it, that our conscious mind is in time, right? It's fixated in time, and our subconscious mind is beyond time, right? It's kind of beyond time as we know it. It's all energy. So that really is a great segue to what you talk about in your book, that they speak to our hearts, not our minds. They can't work through our heads. And so you say that communication can be less productive when people are in their heads, or naysayers are more likely to shut down, and you call it the no-no syndrome. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because that was a fun title for
The no syndrome. I'll be doing a reading for somebody, and when information comes through, I see things, hear things, feel things, know things, and I'll be describing it to the client. I always tell people, be careful about going directly to no, because no, energetically, it's like you're slamming the door in the spirit's face. They back off. So it's better to say, I'm not sure, let me think about it, or I don't know just yet. Okay, because energetically, that's a whole different feel. If you say no to somebody as opposed to, well, let me think about it, there's a different feel. And the no syndrome creates an energetic block. I'm glad you asked this, because yesterday, brand new example, nobody's heard this example before. I was doing a phone reading. I do a lot of phone readings for people because they're just as accurate as in person. Because once again, electromagnetic energy, everything's moving at the speed of light with spirits. And she had a grandfather come through. I had, her maternal grandfather. And the first image he shows me, projects to me, is Disneyland, not Disney World in Florida. I live in Florida. I know, but it was Disneyland, and it was the logo of Disney. I go, Disneyland. No. Are you sure? No. I'm getting this whole thing about Disneyland in Anaheim, California. No, makes no sense. Are you sure? Well, actually, my grandfather knew Walt Disney and was offered a job to work at Disney in, I go, Anaheim, California. She goes, oh, yeah.
Unbelievable.
And the
Unbelievable.
thing is, the whole reading, it was like, it was that. Okay, because I know when I'm getting good information. So for and with all due respect to her, it was her first time she'd had a reading. But if your grandfather comes through and I say Disneyland, Anaheim, California, and your grandfather was offered a job by Walt Disney himself to work in Anaheim, California, instead of no, that doesn't make any sense, the answer should have been yes, that makes sense.
I know. And it's interesting because when you think about your moments, your pivotal moments, it's kind of making me think right now on the spot, like, what would my grandparents come through and say or show? What time stamp in my life would they decide to show, and why? I think it's kind
Well,
of like
yeah,
you say, it's like a way to let you know that they're there.
well, that was an identifier he was trying to bring, because how many people's grandparents, number one, knew Walt Disney personally, and number two, were offered a job to work with him in Anaheim, California? And
Yeah.
so, and what happens is when a spirit comes in, they're going to give identifiers about themselves. I may get a visual, what they look like prior to passing. They generally will let me feel how they died. And people need to understand they're no longer in pain or anything like that, but these are identifiers because they know we are, we're very well aware of how they died. I mean, not in every instance, um, but once I start getting confirmations, see, if we didn't spend so much time with her saying no about Disney, we would have gotten that. Then he would started giving us more information, and then even gotten into transmitting data that would be relevant to her in this life. Now, here's another example of the no syndrome, where the client, I did not find fault with the client. So I'm doing a reading for her, and I said there's a young man, looks like he's about 30, clean cut, kind of collegiate, good looks, like dark hair. He just looked like squeaky clean. And I see this big car, and it looks like the type of cars in the early 60s, when cars are like half a block long, the big car. And I see shattering glass, and I feel blunt trauma to his head, and I feel that
Ah,
he was killed in a car accident.
ah,
No, I have no idea who this is. He's somehow connected with your mother. No, no, no. Okay. I said, that's all right. Make a note of it. Just write it down. She emails me 2 days later and she said she called her mother and asked, and her mother said, "Oh, dear God." She said, "That was my first true love. I knew him in high school. I loved him so much, but we broke up and he died in a car accident when he was 30 years old in exactly the type of car that Mark described." So what had happened was he was coming through, even though this woman did not know him. So she had every right to say, no, no, no. The thing is, he wanted to get a message through to her mother, which
That's
I thought
beautiful.
was really, it was really a very, very
Touching.
touching,
Beautiful.
loving message. So, so sometimes the things that come through you won't know until you receive third-party verification. But for the most part, the things that come through will generally be connected to you. Just be real careful about throwing up. I like to analogize it to the Starship Enterprise raising deflector shields. You put it, no, 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 no. Let's lower the shields so we can start getting the information coming in.
Yeah, I was getting chills when you said that story, usually because I feel, the cognizance, and I feel that I was getting chills through my body, which is a yes, right? That is,
Yeah.
that story is not only correct, but like, wow, right? What an amazing
Yeah,
story.
as much as I've done this, thousands of readings, every reading is unique because every person is unique, and your loved ones in spirit are all unique. And to me, it is such an honor to be able to do this. I look at myself as the custodian of the ability, not as the ability. Because I've met some mediums, they look at this like some type of superpower, and they want to whip it out at a party and try to impress people with it. It's like these TV shows where somebody's in a grocery store and they're looking at celery, and a medium runs up, "Hi, I'm a medium," and blah 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 blah, and they throw a reading at them. Well, that person was in the grocery store to buy celery. They were not there to suddenly deal with grief issues.
Right.
Also, a lot of those shows lack authenticity. I've been on television a lot. And when you get 6 different camera angles, perfect makeup, perfect lighting, perfect sound, close ups, all this, that was not filmed in a minute. That took 4 or 5 hours to film. Plus, people walking around the background, if you see their faces, they all had to sign an authorization allowing their image to appear on camera. So while I'm not crashing on the shows with mediums, because I've been in a bunch of them and I understand that, but please understand that people say, "Well, I thought this would be like such and such show." What, you mean film a reading for an hour and then edit it down to 30 seconds of wow moments? There's going to be a lot of, "Gee, I don't know if my grandfather had anything to do with Disney. Oh, wait, come to think, he knew Walt Disney." So you have to realize that during a reading, some of the things you're going to understand right away, others are going to take time to understand
Because you
because
have to just sit and be with it. And I think intention is such a huge, that's one of the things we teach about all the time is intention, intention, intention. If you don't have the intention to open your heart and connect to spirit, it's not going to happen. You make me think of an interesting example. I used to head up PR and communications for a company called Dragon Naturally Speaking with the product years ago. It was the speech recognition engine. This was many years ago. And we used to do research on the accuracy of the continuous speech engine. And here's what was interesting that we found. I don't think this was ever printed anywhere, but we used to see this in the lab. So the people who were like, "No, this is, sci-fi, this isn't going to work." Guess what? They had really bad results. And the people who really wanted the program to work for them because maybe they were disabled, they had carpal tunnel, whatever it was, they had 90+% accuracy.
yeah.
So the story that you just shared made me think of that. That's science. That is data that consistently we were seeing, and that really plays well to your no, no, no syndrome, right? We need to be open.
Yeah, also spirits are capable because the electromagnetic soul, and as quantum physicists since Einstein's theory of relativity forward in time, in time, um, time doesn't exist on the quantum level. For example, I was doing a reading for this woman and two sisters, and their mother had passed. Mom's spirit comes through, and the mom starts to talk to me about their other sister, and the other sister's alive and well, but she wasn't present during the reading. And she kept giving me the name Michael, 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 and then 10/11, October 11 kept getting repeated. Now, of course, Michael is a very common name. I mean, we all know trainloads of people named Michael that we've met in our lives, but they couldn't think of any significant Michael, nor could they think of anything in October. So 10/11, October 11 didn't ring a bell. Well, roughly 2 months later, they contacted me and they said, Mark, 10 days after we did the reading with you, it was October 11th, which is the day when Hurricane Michael hit our sister's hometown in Florida. She went into labor 3 weeks early and had her baby girl during Hurricane Michael on 10/11.
Wow.
Hey, well, why would they have thought of? I mean, at the time of the reading, Hurricane Michael hadn't formed. That one, whipped up real quick, and it was a bad one. Why would anyone have thought of 10/11? That was not their sister's due date until it was. So spirits have the ability to see what we call the future, and many times they'll bring things up, and we won't know what it means because it hasn't happened yet. Other times they'll bring things up as a warning. If I can do one more,
Well, there's an example in your book, and I don't want to bring it up because I don't want to spoil it for people, but the woman who died who saw her funeral, right?
Exactly. Well, here's another one. I was doing an event and there was this woman I was drawn to, and her father came through and she was with her daughter. She had a teenage daughter. So it was the teenage daughter's grandfather. And he said, don't go to that concert. Don't get in that car. Don't go to the concert. Don't get in the car. And I could see the girls getting all ticked off, and the mother said, all right, well, she's supposed to go to a concert next weekend. I said, your grandfather says no. Well, a year later, I was doing an event, and when I was autographing my book, for people, this mother and daughter came up. They go, "Do you remember us?" And they reminded me of that. And I go, "Yeah, I do. I kind of remember that." And the girl said, "I was so freaked out. I called my friends and told them, the psychic said don't get in the car, so I'm not going." And they were so worried that they were driving on the interstate. They were going slow. They're going like 50 miles an hour. And all of a sudden they got 4 blowouts. All 4 tires blew out. And the state trooper came in. What had happened, it appears that there was a truck that nobody, saw because it had gone before them, and like a huge thing of roofing nails had fallen off all over the highway. And the trooper said, if you girls had been going 75 or 80, you could have flipped and you could have all been killed. So this was how the grandfather it's what I call spirit intervention. Not only did he come in to intervene for her, but because she warned her friends, it saved possibly 3 other lives. And then they were able to clear the highway because I guess they brought equipment out to get all these roofing nails off the highway. But I mean, and when I heard about that, I'm like, seriously, 4 blowouts? 4 blowouts.
I mean, that's amazing, right? That's, spirits can intervene with electrical stuff too, right?
Yeah, they do all the time. Yeah.
So I have 2 more questions. I know we're getting close to time here, but 2 quick questions I want to make sure. One is on dimensions, because this is something I'm still trying to grapple with and get my head around. And you bring up an example of Neil deGrasse Tyson, who has suggested that if you come from a universe with higher dimensions, then moving between dimensions would be as easy as stepping from one room to another, because energy and matter are composed of quanta, right? The electromagnetic energy, which plays to your electromagnetic soul. This is all in the subatomic level. So do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because really what you do when you're connecting, you're really just moving from one room to another in a sense.
I refer to what I do as a medium as interdimensional communication, because that's what it is. Think of our material world as AM radio. The other side is FM radio. So you have these two systems. They use frequency, vibration, energy, and for the most part, they operate separately. However, there are times that they overlap. And with spirit communication, what I'm doing is increasing my vibrational frequency. What spirits do is they decrease their vibrational frequency, and you meet in the zone in between, which I have a lecture called the NDE zone, which gets into that. And what happens is that's what we're doing. It's interdimensional communication. That's also what happens in a near-death experience, where somebody dies, their consciousness, their EMS leaves their body. They feel like they're going through a tunnel. There's the quantum leap, and they encounter deceased loved ones. Guess what? That's the AM touching the FM. Reincarnation, our EMS leaves the AM radio, but then it goes into the FM, and then it comes back and attaches to a new host, meaning a fetus. So that is a small glimpse of understanding interdimensional communication. So for the people who say pseudoscience and hogwash, I would like to respectfully direct their attention to the Schwarzschild quantum lattice theory. Carl Schwarzschild, a good friend of Albert Einstein's and also a brilliant genius in his own right, theorized that electrons would disappear from one place, reappear in another without going through the matter in between. This has actually been reproduced in laboratories recently, because Schwarzschild lived a century ago. So now electrons disappear from one area, appear in another without traversing the matter in between. The theory is that they're actually going through micro black holes. They're quantum leaping from one dimension and reappearing in our dimension in a different location.
So this is not entanglement, or is it related?
No, well, yes, it is. It is related. We'll get to that in a second. But the thing is, so you know those days where you don't feel like they're all here? Well, realize you aren't, because our electrons are constantly quantum leaping to another dimension. So whether we like it or not, we're multidimensional beings without actually realizing it. Now, quantum entanglement is where you take one subatomic particle, like an electron, and when the two particles are separated, even though they may be 1,000,000,000 miles apart, if you do something to one, the other one immediately reacts. And this too ties into spirit communication. And in the chapter I have on frequency beacons, when you're grieving a loved one and you send that electromagnetic impulse, they pick up on it, they quantum leap, and then all of a sudden you'll feel their presence around. Or let's say they want to get a message to you and you're driving down the road, and all of a sudden you turn on the radio and there's that song. And I know this has happened to pretty much everybody I know. Do you think it was a fluke that at that precise moment you turned on the radio and heard that song? And this is all part of electromagnetic souls, meaning spirits are able to influence electromagnetic fields. Guess what? Radio waves are yet another form of electromagnetic energy.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I love that example. I mean, it's amazing because it's, I think one of the things that you do so well is really bring it to the practical level so that we can really understand what's happening,
Yeah, well, we need to, because people have been describing these type of phenomenon for centuries. I mean, particularly in the last 100 years or 100 and I guess 20, 30 years now that, we've had electricity in our houses. So we're seeing up close how electromagnetic energy plays such a huge role in not only in our lives, but in messages from spirits. And to me, it's very reassuring. Spirit communication, it's not scary, it's not spooky, there's nothing negative about it. And the one thing that death can't kill is energy, and the other thing death can't kill is love. And love is a form of energy, and our loved ones in spirit will quantum leap to our dimension to let us know that life, we have one life, and it's eternal.
Oh, that is so beautiful, Mark, right? That is just beautiful. I mean, love is the glue that binds the universe together and all the subatomical particles of that make us up, right?
Yeah.
So last thing, and then we'll close. The last thing I want to touch on, because I think it's important for people to understand this. You know, when you have a loved one come through, you also speak that spirits work in tandem, right? They work together. And so
Oh,
this
we
whole
can do a
idea,
whole show just on that. Yeah.
yeah, no, I know. Collective consciousness, right? The
The
collective
collective
consciousness. So,
consciousness.
yeah,
Think
do you want to
all right.
speak about
Yeah.
that?
Spirit communication. All right. The antiquated way of looking at it is it's one spirit at a time. No. Spirits, think of your electromagnetic soul as a drop of water. When we die, that drop of water separates from the brain, plunges into the eternal sea of the collective consciousness. So when spirits come forward, you're going to get a whole group of them because souls are connected, other souls connected to other souls. So your collective comes through. You may get 7 or 8 spirits. Yesterday, I had one reading where 7 spirits came through, and another one where I think 9 spirits came through. It's very typical. They show up in a group. Think of your spirits as a chorus. And so you're talking to Aunt Gertrude first, and she may start giving you things that far exceeded the scope of anything she knew in this world. She may start talking about what's going on in your life, all types of things. And she may even bring forth information that was known by cousin Joey, who's also in spirit. Because think of your collective as a chorus, and currently, Gertrude's the lead singer who is also harmonized with all the other spirits. She may take a step back and another spirit may come forward. This is why they're able to see past, present, and future. This is why they're able to transmit information to us that far exceeded the scope of anything that they knew in this world. This is also why they may bring up information of a medical nature. Edgar Casey, who was a trance medium, a channeler, was very gifted in bringing forth medical information. Spirits give me a lot of medical information. I always tell people, make sure you check with your doctor before you start changing treatment. But they'll bring through, I mean, I have an understanding of anatomy and physiology, but sometimes they bring things through. I have no idea what it is. And then the client will say, oh my God, I have that actual problem. Okay, so this is all part of the wisdom of the collective consciousness. Now, I want to leave everybody with this question. It has been said that we are all cells in the body of God. If our electromagnetic souls are like drops of water in this eternal sea of consciousness, if everything is electromagnetic energy on the subatomic level and energy binds and connects all of us and everything, energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. If the divine power that we call God always was and always will be, is the collective consciousness God? And if so, are we communicating with God? To which my answer is yes. And we all have that special relationship with the divine power that we call God, no matter what name you want to assign to this energy. And think about what Nikola Tesla said. What one person calls God, another calls the laws of physics.
Well said. So well said, right? And that's also, not only is that well said, but whatever you want to call it, the cosmic soup, collective consciousness, GODDE, right? I mean, in essence, because we're not separated, right? We're not separated.
But we're
Double,
not. And
you
it's a
know,
shame that humans can't understand this. You know, we live on this fragile, beautiful drop of water,
yeah,
okay, that is just the right distance from the sun to sustain life. Yet somehow we think that it is an infinite um, system. In other words, we pollute our oceans, we pollute our air, we deforest it, we make war on each other. There's this kill, crush, destroy, dominating mindset, and yet we could, we literally could end all life as we know it on this planet through a nuclear war. And once we start realizing that we're all interconnected and that we're all here for whatever reason, and start working together. I'm not saying we have to have some one world government, but at least cooperate, start sharing our scientific knowledge. We actually could solve disease, limited food production, pollution. We have the brain power, we have the technology. What we're plagued with is ego, which is edging God out. And ego is created by the brain, not the spirit. So,
Absolutely. Yeah,
anyway,
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we need to be paying attention to that and honoring Gaia because she's us and we are her. There is no
okay.
separation. So, wow, Mark, we went in so many amazing directions today. So many beautiful things. I could talk to you for hours, actually. Is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with? Parting words, anything that you're working on that you would like people to know about? Obviously, we're going to put links to all of your books up on the screen so people can just do a quick click to purchase them. But anything else you're working on?
Well, I'd like to invite everyone to visit my website, which is afterlifefrequency.com, and I invite you to sign up for my newsletter. That'll keep you up to date on all my tour dates and online events as well. And also, I'd like to invite you to tune into my weekly live stream show, The Psychic and the Doc. My co-host is world-renowned behavioral psychologist, Dr. Pat Baccili. People call in, and I'll do a reading for callers in tandem with Dr. Pat's uplifting insights. She helps people understand what these messages mean. We've been doing this show for over 3 years, and recently we won an award for Best Radio Show of 2024. And we were just so honored and humbled by that. And you can find out about all of that by visiting my website, afterlifefrequency.com. Renee, thank you so much. I'm just so honored to be part of this program. Thank you for including me.
Oh, you're welcome. And the honor has been ours, Mark. It's been a wonderful hour together, and I can't wait until our viewers get to tune in.